Hey everyone, Hans here. Hope all of you are doing well. Today I'm going to predominantly do some reading, and I hope I can get it all done within the amount of time the machine allows me. Uh, as the title implies, it has to do with freemen, and it is basically the topic is basically a legal system that is, you know, that comes from Ireland and also Scotland, but might actually have been predominantly all over the Celtic world, and also um, maybe even also something to do with Germanic systems, perhaps even Europe altogether. The specific areas regarding the surface research I've been doing is, in this case, Ireland and Scotland, predominantly Ireland. My pronunciations are probably going to be off, but hey, you know what? At least I made the effort to get into this. I have not seen it anywhere else before, and well, here you go. There are three main names with which you can refer to this legal system, which is commonly, well, it is common. If only it were, maybe. You have Brehon law, you have Feinagas, which means Freemanism. Oh, and Brehon law, that is of course more so an English term. The Brehons, it gets explained, but to make it sure, it gets translated as judge, if you look it up. But these men were not judges as we are familiar with the concept today. They were more so guides through a legal dispute. The two sides of that would be in dispute with each other actually had to talk to each other, and these men would be sitting in the middle, not judging. They would actually be proposing things, maybe saying what, giving an idea of what might be acceptable discourse and what would be too much of a demand, or how grievous is the dispute. All of these things. That's what these guys were for, the Brahons, who find their roots in the poets, and well, I suppose they were like a group of druids, all the same, a bit of both perhaps. So we have Brehon law, the Feinagas, which means freemanism, loosely translated, and Lina Feine, which is law of freemen. These laws were civil rather than serving as a criminal code. They concerned predominantly the compensations for damages, as well as figuring out inheritances and upholding agreements. There was no concept as state sanctions. This was all, well, I'm going to keep reading. I'll get back to that point in a bit. The Brehons were those who would oversee what you might call a jurisdictional system. Since St. Patrick, however, there came the slow halt of the oral traditions, as it's called. But I actually do believe that that our ancestors could write and read. Also in the West, they weren't analphabetic whatsoever. There was just a grand theft, if you will. So yeah, there was some mention in the surface research that I did that these traditions of Freemanism slowly grinded to a halt in the crescent locales, where canon law became the usurper, if you will, of these practices. You also had like the Celtic Church before that. They were not on good footing with the Catholics, but both are Christian factions essentially. Whether they fought each other or not, they still, basically decided to take over. What is also worth looking at is that the system was decentralized, and it consisted of different groups, or tribes if you prefer, with each their separate laws. relating to their own people, their own specific tribe, of course, and their own land, uh, who would, mm, which would have been held into accordance during such a dispute. You can find some of that. I have not checked this work myself yet. I hope I can figure it out. In the Annals of Ulster, in the Sankas Mar, which is a piece from 438 AD, is where you can find more about all of this. From what I have found out is that these Brehons were likely poets, again, as I mentioned, perhaps also druids, and it is very likely that the ancient myths of our people, the few that we still are allowed to know because a lot was destroyed, could have been used as perhaps reference points to bring some direction into the discourse. Brehon law is about compensation, as mentioned, not punishment. That also came with the upcoming of Christianity. And of course, what was once decentralized was now erased, and instead we had now a centralized system where Christian hierarchies, that is the clergy, um, were the judges. Like then we're talking about judges, people who moralize and tell others how to live their lives, essentially. Perhaps it's worth noting that while decentralized Freemanism was an accepted form of legal course all over Ireland and the extensive Celtic world, perhaps Europe altogether. Freemanism applies to women as much as to men, proving that the ancestral European ways do indeed respect and love the women as much as the men. It is in post-Christian times when the manlet becomes the boss in the household, the master and his poor breeding cattle of Christ, the slave, which is of course his wife. It is important to note that while not free men, several others still enjoyed, all kinds of protections, which would be of course the children, something you do not hear a lot about in our modern system that much. They're usually only used as political tools. Also the mentally ill. That seems pretty caring, don't you say? Doesn't seem like something a club-wielding caveman would think about doing. It's a bit of sophistication there. And of course, people in debt who could not pay off whatever debt they were in. These people, well, it gets explained in a bit some more, but according to some, they say that the Irish had slaves. I disagree with that in some contexts. Might there have been some vicious characters who did have slaves? Probably. You'll find those everywhere, unfortunately. But as a cultural marker, these were thralls. And a thrall is not a slave. That is a misconception. A thrall is someone who is so irresponsible or just simply has a debt that could not be paid, who has to work that debt off. And in other cases, if it's someone who is extremely irresponsible, it's kind of like welfare in a sense, except that now you have people who are making sure that those who cannot look after themselves for whatever reason are still contributing to the tribe, family, that sort of thing. Not this weird concept as a society and what have you, which would have not been a thing back in the day. It is a little side mention here, and you make of it that you will. It appears that men could have multiple women, but that is of course with each woman having her separate wedding agreement with the man in question. It does not reflect on these perverse polygamous practices spawned from a sexually repressed and eventually turned deviant society. Okay, now they did have kings. but it's not like what we think of today. One country, one king. Kingship meant something different back in the day, and that is also very interesting. So the kings that came later, it's kind of like a bastard version in a sense, but they gave it a name that appeals to our people, and well, we fell for it, I guess. I don't know. The Bech Brefa, I think it's called. Kings were upholders of the law, the Ri, or also in Gaulish Riks. They did not write any laws, and they were also secondary figures when it came to legal resolutions. Interestingly enough, there were different kinds of kings. You have the Krif Kablach Riben, pardon me, which means something like King of the Peaks, and the Ri Tuaif, which means the king of a tuaf. That is singular. That's probably a tribesman of some kind. So yeah, probably that references to a tribal king, is my guess. Again, and I have to say I'm guessing. I could be wrong on this, but that seems to be what it reflects. You have the Ri Buiden, king of bands, or the Ri Tuaf, the Ruiri, that's also one, which means over king, and that could perhaps be an organizer of social events or some kind of general, maybe even. Who knows? Then you had the Ri Buneit Kachkin, which is the great king of each individual, and the Ri Ruirich, which is king of over kings. That is very interesting. The great king of each individual, not the king of the people. Isn't that curious? And I think there is a certain power in wording it like that, because now you're calling out every single individual's rights. There is no vague the people, if you will. There is only a specific. You as a person have your rights. You as a person have your rights. Every single head in this room, every single head in this tribe, what have you. However far that extended. But there was no body, there was no people of anything like that, which is very intriguing in my eyes. And then you had Ri Koikit, I think it is, which is king of a province, which might be someone who is responsible for the land, as sure as the people living there, perhaps. And that is, I believe, all the kings. Let's see. Let's check my other papers. Yeah, it continues that these kings, in terms of status, were equals to every free man. So they were not high and above, no thrones or anything, no crowns on their heads. Definitely meant something than what it became later. Incredibly responsible, likely wise individuals. That seems sensible. This does not seem like something you do for a paycheck. This is something you do because it's just in you to do so. It isn't until bishops show up that we see a vying for above and below in terms of freemen and the clergy or kings. So above and below, it's a term that's used in certain spiritual discussions, I suppose, as well, but definitely in religion, and it always comes down to you have the clergy above and you have the dirty peasants below. And that is not an old concept, guys. Well, it's an old concept in the sense that it's always been there, but yeah, guess where you stand in that. And it's not only reflective of religion alone. There are plenty of peoples who have this above and below concept going. Yeah, if you want to partake in that, I mean, it's up to you, of course. Some definitely want to do so, otherwise it would have died out a long time ago. Might have never been a thing in the first place. But the whole master-slave concept, I'm not a big fan myself. I don't want to be a slave, and I also don't want to be a master, as far as I'm concerned in all of this. Kinship. degrees of kinship. You had the Gelfine, which is the bride king, people with a common grandfather, the Derpfine, a certain king which had a common great grandfather, and then you had the Earfine, afterkin, uh, which had a common great great grandfather. And at the end, you have a very interesting concept in my eyes, the Indfine, which is something as final kin or endkin, which refers to all of Irish ancestry, all of Irish blood, essentially. So, to all of you who just naturally have been talking about this for the last few years, I hope you feel a bit vindicated. Here are the paperworks are out there apparently, and the few that aren't burned. The tribal leader was known as Age Finne, which is the familial pillar, which is a pretty awesome name. Ken Finne, which is the family head, the headman, chieftain if you want. They were responsible over their side of a legal dispute and to ensure that all agreements were upheld. And of course, that implies that you had to be honorable, even in the wake of being the transgressor. Like, let's say, if you by accident pushed over someone's cart and a wheel broke off and it ends up in one of these disputes, even if you thought that it was an accident and you were not supposed to repair the wheel because it was an accident, if the agreement is you're gonna repair the wheel or you're gonna get a new one, your headman would ensure that you would pay that off. Should a family member break word, he or she could be outcasted from the family and considered, because they would be a liability. This equals as a banishment and, of course, comes with a swift disinheritance. Now we approach inheritance, which was partitive, I believe that is. There is no such thing as an illegitimate heir either. That's just not a concept. If you are a child of that tribe, that family, then you are. Doesn't matter, who your parents were necessarily in that sense. So again, so long as you weren't banished, you likely would get a part of the familial wealth. That could be coin, cattle, land. Daughters were more likely to inherit movable wealth, possibly because they are assumed to inherit land via their husbands. If someone childless died, the right of fin tiu, which is kin land, was applied, and the inheritance went to relatives or to those also of Irish blood. So if you were the last of your tribe, so to say, of your bloodline, any other Irish fella was more than welcome to, get the land apparently. Keep it in the extended family. Then there was a concept like sureties, or assertances, maybe that's another way to call it. There was no police force as we understand it today. Instead, they had sureties, which were oath-sworn individuals that would ensure that an agreement was seen through. These would be usually relatives, so again, could be that headman. But if he was too busy, there might probably be a brother or a cousin or a mother or what have you, who would who would step in there. You have three types of sureties. You had the Naiden, also Mac, it's called, who enforced the payments. Then you had the Rath, someone that would pay off a contract on behalf of a debtor. Bit risky. And then you had the Eitire, I hope I get that right. Essentially a hostage. And for example, within 10 days a debt had to be paid. If that debt would not be paid, now the hostage has to pay his or her body price, as that is called, from what I understand, on top of the debt. So the hostage would essentially become some sort of thrall. Best to avoid that altogether, I would say. Even today, guys. Try to avoid that if you can. It's not worth it. It really isn't. The decline of Freemanism came with the Normans in 1167 AD, and the church, of course. Who this is now we're talking about the Catholic Church. Before that, with Saint Patrick, that's the Celtic Church. They are not buddies, and the Celtic Church, I think, has been eradicated by the Catholic Church altogether these days. So much for that unity, that Christian unity, or something that some people like to talk about a lot. Yeah, a few historical names. Henry II, aka Henry Plantagenet. Anyone who knows his medieval families will realize that this is one of the most powerful families that ruled in Europe at the time. Created his what is called the Lordship of Ireland and campaigned to undo local laws and customs. The Norman Richard Strongbow de Clare, 2nd Earl of Pembroke, was assigned territories in Leicester in 1170 AD under Freemanism through his marriage with the daughter of a man called Dermot MacMurchada. The last guy has like several names, but this was his, I suppose, recognized name in Christian documents. Near the 15th century, in unoccupied land of the Normans, so what was left free, Freemanism lasted for a good long time, although at this point most of it was already tainted with canon, which is Catholic law concepts, who were, however, de facto writ in the legal field. So I think it became, yeah, in that sense you see the slow and steady, the game of inches, every inch over every generation another inch is given up, and eventually you come to what the new what the how shall we call it, what the anti-white wants basically is what you get. If they can't get it immediately, they'll just play the game of inches, which can last a few generations. Maybe something that good people should think about doing as well. It's not about always getting immediately what you want and then thinking that's all done and away with. Freemanism could not be adopted by the English-controlled government, as it is called. English, right. The imposition of the Statutes of Kilkenny in 1367 and the policy of surrender and regrant both essentially forced clans to become serfs into a feudal system, which nullified Freemanism straight up. And maybe it's worth mentioning that the feudal system is essentially, it's just almost a euphemism for communism. In practice, they're identical, you could even say. If you had maybe with the exception that if you had a lord back in the day who was a good guy, I guess you were lucky, but you're still dependent on someone else. That is not Freemanism. Far from it. So even if he is a good guy, it's like, okay, congrats, you were lucky. Yeah. You're still below, right? Oh, and real quickly, the feudal model of the Normans also harkens back to Charlemagne's empire. I have the Viking series on that. Go watch the first 2-3 episodes and again, put 2 and 2 together, I suppose. This plays off, how many centuries is it? From the, let's say from the 8th century up until the 15th century, something like that. It's not exactly a millennia, but by now, the centuries start counting up after a while. And then, of course, you also had the Tudor conquest of Ireland in the mid-16th century, so could throw that in there. It was swiftly followed up by outlawing partitive inheritance, causing, of course, an overall impoverishment and mass disinheritance of Irish folk in regards to their own land, and to ban it's a term called tanistry. I'm not really sure what it is, but it has to do with titles, etc., being carried over from one generation to the next. So, let's say you have a brehon and his son, qualifies to be a brehon too, and that was basically forbidden that title was passed on. So, kind of like a book burning in that sense, a title burning. Yeah, lovely, isn't that? Just send your little man in there with halberds and muskets or whatever weaponry it was supposed to be, blunderbusses maybe back then, and just subdue everyone and just put your stamp over what used to be. But again, this is like a stamp over two other stamps already. Lovely. And then to finish off in 1600 AD, and since in the territories where these groups, these families swung the scepter, kept pursuing the Brehons, the freeman, and officially the last Brehon was put down in somewhere around 1618, 1620 AD on the island of Lewis in Scotland. And that is that. So, guys, what do you think? Is this interesting? Is this worth pursuing? This is a description that I made of, initially the description of how Europeans, well, at the very least the Irish and the Scottish, basically, resolved legal disputes with each other. No trials, no judges, no prisons, anything like that. There are cases perhaps where the recompense for damage might have been a duel to the death, maybe a demand for an execution, but from what I found is that executions were really exceptional. It was definitely something that they tried to avoid if they could. That does not sound like bloodthirsty beasts, men, with their skin over their back, traveling through the wilds, chasing mammoth or what have you with rocks and stone spears, as if that's how you take one of those beasts down with that. But anyways, also worth noticing is the tuaf that they speak of. That is in reference, I believe, to a tribal member or to a tribe in general. Tuaf, singular and plural. And that reminisces me about, it reminds me of a Gallic deity that goes by the name of Tutatis, and in modern day French you can still hear tu. Tu is French for everyone. That's just a reference to everyone. Tout le monde, the entire world, what have you. Tu. Tutatis is somewhat of a representation of the tribe, the body of the tribe, if you will. So, yeah, you make of that what you will. Everyone was a tuaf, was a tu. That is, and again, that spans beyond Ireland and beyond Scotland. So, also the name for for king, which is Rix, is how it would be in Gaul. Just these little things. I know that Bren might also be another term for king, but not too certain about that. Could be a local dialect or what have you. These things happen. And of course, in regards to two is 2 tons. Sounds familiar, guys? Oh, it's just a coincidence, isn't it? Yeah. There were probably connections with the Germanic world as well. Because we're kinsmen, we're of the same bloodlines. A lot of people don't like to hear that. I think those people really need to perhaps do a bit of digging, like I here did. I mean, this is not even digging. This is taking a shovel and just scraping off a bit of muck from the surface. That's all I did here. There's so much more to this. And, well, this speaks of a legal system that was denied us. And it was done at sword point, clearly. A lot of money and unorganized warfare went behind this. And the legal system that came since is just something that was smacked right on top of that of Europeans, or at least of some European tribes. I would really like to dig into this some more if I can. I know other people who are also into this, and I'm a bit intimidated by them in terms of the knowledge that they have about this. I'm like, I might bring all of this up, but they might see this video and they're like, yeah, okay, congrats for beginning. You took the first step. But for those of you who have never heard of any of this or only know like the bare surface like I do, maybe we should at least have a chin wag about this. You know, this could be a step forward in standing up for white well-being, maybe. Just to at least have a look and get a sense of, can we legally, maybe bring some of that back. That could be potentially useful. Could have, and for those who think, nah, that it vanished for a reason or what have you. Okay then, it's I think it's worth at least considering this, and at the very least know that this happened, so it doesn't just vanish in the garbage bin of history, which it should never do as far as this goes. And with that said, the machine is about to give out, so I'm gonna call it one for now. Here you go. Freemanism. Have you heard about it one of these days? Have you heard it throughout your entire life? You all have a good one, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.